the isolated cabin. So, Clara had always loved the idea of a solo retreat to a remote cabin in the woods. After a particularly stressful period at work, she decided to book a weekend getaway to a secluded cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. The listing boasted of stunning views, complete privacy, and a cozy, rustic setting. It sounded like the perfect escape. When Clara arrived at the cabin, she was immediately struck by its charm. Nestled among towering trees and surrounded by a picturesque landscape, the cabin was everything she had hoped for. The interior was warm and inviting, with a stone fireplace, wooden beams, and large windows that offered a panoramic view of the forest. Clara felt a sense of tranquility as she settled in for her stay. The weather was overcast, and rain began to fall steadily as Clara prepared her dinner. The sound of raindrops hitting the roof and the gentle patter on the windows created a soothing ambiance. Clara enjoyed the cozy atmosphere, feeling completely at ease as she read a book by the fireplace. As night fell, the rain grew heavier and the cabin became shrouded in darkness. The storm outside intensified, with gusty winds and occasional flashes of lightning. The isolation of the cabin became more pronounced, and Clara felt a twinge of unease. She tried to push the feeling aside, attributing it to the storm and her solitude. Around midnight, Clara was jolted awake by a loud thud coming from outside the cabin. The sound was followed by a series of scraping noises, as if something was being dragged along the ground. Clara's heart raced, and she lay still in bed, straining to listen. The noises continued intermittently, growing louder and more persistent. Nervous but determined to investigate, Clara grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made her way to the front door. The wind howled outside and the rain pelted against the cabin. She peered through the peephole but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Gathering her courage, Clara opened the door and shone the flashlight around the perimeter of the cabin. The storm had reduced visibility, and the area was drenched in rain. Clara couldn't see anything unusual, but the eerie feeling remained. She closed the door and locked it, trying to calm her racing heart. She decided to check the cabin's windows and doors to ensure everything was secure. As Clara moved through the cabin, she noticed something unsettling. The flashlight's beam illuminated a series of muddy footprints leading from the front door to the living room. The prints were large and appeared to be from someone wearing heavy boots. Clara's anxiety spiked, and she quickly checked all the windows and doors again, confirming that they were securely locked. The footsteps seemed to lead to the basement door, which Clara had been instructed to keep closed. With a deep breath, she opened the basement door, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The basement was dark and cluttered, filled with old furniture and storage boxes. Clara descended the stairs, feeling a growing sense of dread. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara found nothing unusual. The basement appeared to be undisturbed, but the oppressive atmosphere made her skin crawl. She decided to return to the main floor and try to relax, though her nerves were on edge. The storm raged on outside, and the howling wind seemed to carry an eerie undertone. As Clara settled back into the living room, she heard the scraping noise again, this time coming from inside the cabin. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, as if something was being dragged across the floor. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, and she grabbed a heavy fireplace poker for protection. Following the noise, Clara traced it to a closet in the hallway. She hesitated for a moment before opening the closet door. Inside, she found an old trunk covered in dust. The trunk appeared to have been untouched for years, but the scraping noise had clearly come from that. With trembling hands, Clara opened the trunk. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs, letters, and strange objects, items that seemed out of place. Among the contents was a journal with handwritten entries describing a previous occupant's unsettling experiences in the cabin. The entries spoke of a mysterious presence and strange occurrences that had led the occupant to leave abruptly. Clara's fear intensified as she read the journal. The descriptions of eerie noises and feelings of being watched matched her own experiences. She felt a growing sense of urgency to leave the cabin, but the storm outside made it impossible to drive. She decided to stay in the living room with all the lights on, trying to ignore the unsettling presence. The storm continued throughout the night, and Clara's nerves were frayed. The noises and feelings of being watched persisted, making it nearly impossible for her to sleep. She huddled by the fireplace, trying to stay warm and calm, but the fear was overwhelming. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to subside. Clara, exhausted and frightened, packed her belongings and prepared to leave the cabin. She couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had been watching her throughout the night. The once charming retreat had become a nightmarish ordeal, and Clara was eager to escape. When Clara arrived back home, she researched the cabin's history and found disturbing details about its previous occupants. The journal she had discovered was just one part of a troubling history of strange occurrences and disappearances associated with the cabin. The eerie experience left Clara with a haunting memory of her solo retreat, and she vowed never to return to the isolated cabin. The lonely lighthouse. So, Eric had always been fascinated by lighthouses. The idea of spending a night alone in one, surrounded by the roaring sea and the relentless wind, appealed to him more than he could explain. When he found an Airbnb listing for a restored lighthouse on a remote island off the coast of Oregon, he didn't hesitate to book it for a solo weekend retreat. The lighthouse, known as the Ravens Point Light, was situated on a rugged island that was accessible only by a short boat ride. The listing promised stunning ocean views, a historic lighthouse tower, and complete solitude. Eric eagerly anticipated his stay, looking forward to the peace and isolation that the lighthouse would offer. When he arrived on the island, the weather was calm and the sea was tranquil. The lighthouse was just as charming as the listing had described, with its whitewashed walls, red roof, and sweeping views of the ocean. The interior was quaint and cozy, with a well-maintained kitchen, a small living area, and a spiral staircase leading up to the lantern room. Eric spent the first day exploring the island and enjoying the beautiful scenery. The lighthouse's surrounding cliffs offered breathtaking views of the crashing waves below. As evening approached, Eric prepared a simple dinner and settled in for a quiet. As darkness fell, the weather began to change. A dense fog rolled in, enveloping the lighthouse and the island in a thick, damp mist. The fog muffled the sounds of the sea, creating an eerie silence that Eric found unsettling. He turned on the lighthouse's original Fresnel lens, which bathed the surroundings in a soft, flickering light. That night, as Eric tried to sleep, he heard strange noises. The fog seemed to amplify every sound, and he was disturbed by the distant thudding and scratching noises that seemed to come from outside the lighthouse. He brushed it off as the wind playing tricks, but the noises persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Unable to sleep, Eric decided to investigate. He took a flashlight and ventured out into the foggy night, walking along the rocky path that led around the lighthouse. The fog obscured his vision, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The strange noises continued, now accompanied by a faint, eerie whispering. Eric's unease grew as he followed the sounds to the base of the lighthouse. The fog seemed to be closing in, and the whispering grew louder, almost as if someone was trying to communicate with him. He felt a chill run down his spine and quickly retreated to the safety of the lighthouse. Back inside, Eric decided to check the lighthouse's logbook, which was kept for historical purposes. He hoped it might provide some insight into the noises or any past occurrences. As he flipped through the pages, he discovered entries about strange phenomena experienced by previous keepers of the lighthouse. The entries described unsettling sounds, sightings of shadowy figures, and the feeling of being watched. The logbook also mentioned a tragic incident from decades ago, a previous lighthouse keeper who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The keeper was said to have been searching for something in the foggy night when he vanished without a trace. The entries hinted at an unknown presence on the island, an entity that seemed to lurk in the fog. Disturbed by what he had read, Eric tried to dismiss it as old superstitions. However, the noises outside continued, growing more intense. The whispers seemed to be calling out to him, urging him to come outside. The fog was now so thick that he could barely see the lighthouse's beam cutting through it. As the night wore on, the noises and whispers became unbearable. Eric felt an overwhelming sense of dread and fear. The lighthouse's light flickered erratically, and the temperature inside dropped suddenly. Eric's flashlight began to malfunction, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Desperate for answers, Eric decided to return to the base of the lighthouse. He followed the path through the fog, his heart racing with each step. The whispers grew louder, and he felt an icy presence surrounding him. The fog seemed to part momentarily, revealing a shadowy figure standing near the edge of the cliff. Eric's fear reached its peak as he saw the figure, an apparition dressed in old-fashioned lighthouse keeper's attire, with hollow eyes staring directly at him. The figure appeared to be beckoning him closer. Paralyzed with fear, Eric took a step back and stumbled, almost falling over the cliff's edge. The The figure vanished as the fog closed in again, leaving Eric alone and terrified. He scrambled back to the lighthouse, locking the door behind him. The whispers and noises continued outside, but he no longer dared to investigate. He spent the remainder of the night huddled in the living area, the feeling of being watched, never leaving. When dawn finally arrived, the fog began to lift, and the lighthouse returned to its serene state. Eric was exhausted and shaken by the night's events. He packed his belongings quickly, eager to leave the island and put the terrifying experience behind him. As he boarded the boat to leave, he looked back at the lighthouse one last time. The once charming structure now seemed foreboding and sinister, a place where something otherworldly had made its presence known. Eric left the island with a haunting memory of his night in the lighthouse and a newfound respect for the mysteries that lurk in isolation.